Halo, selamat pagi semuanya. Saya sangat senang bisa menyambut Anda semua di acara JuaraGCP Virtual Graduation Event. Nama saya Laura Filoma dari tim Developer Relations and Ecosystem. Saya akan menjadi host Anda hari ini. Saya harap Anda semua dalam kondisi sehat dan aman. Dalam acara kita hari ini, kami ingin bersama merayakan pencapaian developers dari seluruh Indonesia, dimanapun Anda berada. Tanpa menunggu lebih lama lagi, saya akan mengundang Ibu Megawaty Khie selaku Country Director for Google Cloud Indonesia untuk membuka acara kita pagi ini. Ibu Mega, over to you.
Selamat pagi. Laura, are we good? Kedengaran suara saya?
Okay. Kedengaran.
So, selamat pagi teman-teman semua. Terima kasih waktunya dan thank you for joining sesi ini ya. So, salam sehat dan salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Pandemi COVID-19 semakin turut meningkatkan kebutuhan transformasi digital pada sektor privat dan juga sektor publik. Teknologi cloud berperan penting dalam transformasi digital, salah satunya untuk menjaga keberlangsungan aktivitas bisnis serta kehidupan sehari-hari, terutama ketika banyak kegiatan tatap muka menjadi terbatas. Sejalan dengan kebutuhan tersebut, kami telah meluncurkan Google Cloud Region di Jakarta pada bulan Juni tahun ini untuk memenuhi permintaan teknologi cloud yang semakin meningkat. Layanan cloud bukan hanya dibutuhkan oleh perusahaan startup, namun juga oleh perusahaan tradisional, enterprise seperti telco, perbankan, manufaktur, retail, dan banyak yang lain. Yang dituntut untuk mentransformasi proses bisnis dan menggunakan teknologi digital untuk bersaing. Ini juga termasuk perusahaan-perusahaan BUMN. Untuk memenuhi kebutuhan industri tentang teknologi cloud, maka dibutuhkan pula talenta digital yang menguasai dan mampu mengembangkan teknologi cloud sesuai dengan kebutuhan industri. Berdasarkan laporan Boston Consulting Group, BCG, terdapat lapangan pekerjaan baru sebanyak 345.000 posisi hingga tahun 2023 apabila teknologi public cloud diadopsi secara signifikan di Indonesia. Oleh karena itu, program ini, JuaraGCP, adalah salah satu upaya penting bagi Google untuk mempersiapkan tenaga kerja Indonesia yang handal di bidang cloud. JuaraGCP telah melatih lebih dari 12.000 developer di 60 kota dengan berbagai skill cloud termasuk data analytics, machine learning, DevOps, dan topik lainnya dari level pemula sehingga advance yang telah menyelesaikan lebih dari 160.000 online labs di Quick Labs. Banyak dari peserta JuaraGCP yang juga berhasil mendapat sertifikasi dari Google Cloud maupun Coursera. Kami juga berpartisipasi dengan dalam Digital Talent Scholarship yang diselenggarakan oleh Kementerian Kominfo. Dan tahun ini kami telah melatih 1.000 orang tentang dasar-dasar teknologi cloud untuk mempersiapkan para peserta mendapatkan sertifikat Associate Cloud Engineer. Selain untuk mempersiapkan tenaga kerja, JuaraGCP dan Google Cloud, Jakarta Region merupakan bagian dari komitmen Google dalam mendukung Indonesia untuk menjadi salah satu ekonomi digital terbesar, bukan hanya di Asia Tenggara, tapi di dunia. Infrastruktur dan talenta merupakan elemen penting untuk menjaga ekonomi Indonesia secara keberlanjutan. Kedepannya, Google akan terus melanjutkan investasi di Indonesia dan juga akan tetap meluncurkan program-program pelatihan yang bertujuan untuk meningkatkan jumlah dan kualitas talenta digital di tanah air kita. Terakhir, selamat untuk 12.000 developer yang telah menyelesaikan program JuaraGCP dan 1.000 peserta program Digital Talent Scholarship tentang Google Cloud. Talenta Digital Indonesia, maju bersama-sama. Terima kasih dan selamat pagi.
Thank you very much, Ibu Mega, for your opening keynote. Saya selanjutnya akan mengundang guest speaker kita setelah ini. Selanjutnya, saya akan mengundang tamu kehormatan Juara GCP Graduation, Bapak Muhammad Neil L. Himam, selaku Deputy Chairman for Digital Economy and Creative Products from Ministry of Tourism and Creative Economy. Terima kasih sebelumnya, Pak, atas waktunya. Over to you, Bapak Neil.
Terima kasih, Mbak Laura. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Salam, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan, dan salam Indonesia maju. Pengembangan ekosistem ekonomi digital memerlukan salah satunya pembangunan talenta digital. Terutama dalam menghadapi era revolusi industri 4.0, Indonesia saat ini masih menghadapi tantangan akan kekurangan tenaga kerja, baik terampil maupun ahli di bidang digital. Dan berdasarkan laporan World Bank pada tahun 2016, Indonesia mengalami kekurangan tenaga kerja semi terampil dan terampil sebesar tahun 2016 sebesar 9 juta orang dalam kurun waktu 15 tahun. Berarti untuk memenuhi kebutuhan tersebut rata-rata harus dihasilkan sekitar 600.000 talenta digital setiap tahun. Nah, keluhan dari industri digital baik startup maupun perusahaan besar adalah bahwa mayoritas lulusan dari universitas di Indonesia belum memiliki kemampuan yang sesuai dengan standar keperluan di dunia industri, dan sehingga kebanyakan dari mereka perlu dilatih kembali untuk sebelum dapat dipekerjakan. Atau jika terpaksa, para industri ini harus merekrut talenta dari luar negeri. Dalam menghadapi revolusi industri 4.0 ini juga, Indonesia membutuhkan tenaga ahli di banyak bidang digital, terutama di bidang IoT, baik big data, keamanan cyber, kecerdasan buatan, machine learning, bahkan 5G, dan tentunya juga cloud computing, yang juga harus disertai dengan kemampuan soft skill yang mendukung dalam beretika kerja sebagai profesional di bidang digital. Untuk itulah program seperti JuaraGCP ini menjadi sarana yang sangat penting dalam memenuhi kebutuhan digital talents di bidang cloud computing terutama di Indonesia. Tadi saya dengar sudah 12.000 ya pesertanya, lulusannya, termasuk juga dengan yang digital talentnya Kominfo. Tentunya ini sangat membantu dalam upaya menutupi kekurangan dari kebutuhan talenta-talenta digital yang ada di Indonesia. Dan ingat teman-teman sekalian, dengan cloud computing dan nanti sebentar lagi masuknya 5G, itu akan mengubah landscape dari ekonomi digital terutama di Indonesia. Akan banyak sekali pekerjaan-pekerjaan computing yang akan dilakukan di cloud dan yang mana tidak lagi membutuhkan peralatan yang canggih di end usernya. Seperti contoh, nanti ke depan saya prediksikan cloud gaming akan menjadi salah satu killer apps dari cloud computing atau dari 5G ini nanti. Seperti kita ketahui juga, dalam proses memenuhi kebutuhan tenaga kerja ahli di bidang digital, pemerintah melakukan proses juga inkubasi dari hulu ke hilir, seperti contohnya Kemenparekraf, yaitu dengan melakukan program yang sudah rutin dijalankan sejak masih zamannya Badan Ekonomi Kreatif, seperti program Backcraft Developer Day atau BDD, kemudian Backcraft Digital Talent, ada juga Backcraft for Pre-Startup atau sekarang jadi Backcraft for Startup, ada bantuan insentif pemerintah, ada GSI, Go Startup Indonesia, dalam mencoba mendukung ekosistem ekonomi digital Indonesia. Selain itu juga kami mendukung buat talenta digital yang sudah mempunyai produk dan produknya itu bisa diekspor, mendukung mereka untuk bisa hadir di ajang eksibisi internasional. Selain Kemenparekraf, tadi juga sudah disebutkan, Kementerian Komunikasi dan Informatika juga memiliki program Digital Talent Scholarship yang memberikan beasiswa bagi para calon-calon talenta digital, sekali lagi juga dalam rangka untuk memenuhi kebutuhan atau gap yang terjadi di Indonesia saat ini. Selain pemerintah, tentunya peran pihak swasta juga diperlukan untuk memenuhi kebutuhan talenta digital, dan tentunya diharapkan ada kolaborasi antara pemerintah dan swasta seperti program JuaraGCP ini ataupun program seperti BDD, BDT yang nantinya ke depan bisa lebih diintensifkan Karena terus terang teman-teman sekalian ya, Indonesia ini sangat luas, penduduknya 270 juta tersebar di ribuan pulau. Makanya dulu kenapa kita adakan BDD keliling Indonesia, tujuannya untuk memastikan bahwa kita punya cukup talenta digital yang siap diasah, yang punya potensi untuk bisa berkontribusi dalam ekonomi nasional. Demikian sambutan dari kami. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi 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 Om. Makasih, saya kembalikan ke Mbak Laura.
Terima kasih Bapak Neil. Terima kasih Pak sekali lagi yang sudah meluangkan waktunya bersama dengan kami dan sudah membagikan pesan yang inspiratif bagi developers di seluruh Indonesia yang saat ini sedang mengikuti acara kita. Selanjutnya, sesi yang sangat exciting, yaitu Fireside Chat on How to Become a Successful Engineer. Dalam sesi ini, kita akan mengadakan live Q&A session. Persiapkan pertanyaan Anda dan silahkan langsung submit pertanyaannya di live chat. Saya mau mengundang Pak Wisu selaku Customer Solutions Manager Google Cloud Indonesia yang akan memimpin sesi ini. Over to you, Pak Wisu.
Halo, selamat pagi semuanya. Terima kasih untuk tune in ke acara JuaraGCP Graduation pagi hari ini. Tamu kita saat ini butuh sedikit pengenalan. Kelsey Hightower adalah Principal Engineer Google Cloud. Barusan terbit sebuah artikel, From McDonald's to Google Cloud. Cerita bagaimana Kelsey Hightower menjadi salah seorang terkemuka di cloud computing sebagai ahli yang belajar secara otodidak dan punya cara yang unik melalui cara storytelling. Kelsey mendapatkan solusi untuk masalah keragaman sektor teknologi di enterprise yang terkenal rumit. Sehingga dia kini menjadi salah satu tokoh terkemuka di industri teknologi informasi. Melalui forum ini kami undang Anda untuk diskusi, berinteraksi melalui fasilitas chat yang tersedia di YouTube live stream. Apalagi tamu kita kali ini punya cerita karir yang sangat unik. Mungkin di antara Anda sedang berada pada karir yang sama seperti bagaimana Kelsey dulu memulainya. Kelsey, if Laura, if you please can invite Kelsey to the stage. Hi, Kelsey. Good morning. It's great to have you here. Very insightful going through the article, particularly on how was mentioned your first job at McDonald's. Can you share some pointers and insights on how to become a great engineer?
Yeah, I get that question quite a bit. So in that particular article, like a lot of folks, I didn't start necessarily thinking that I would get into this whole computer science world or this computer software engineering. And for me, it's a lot of self-taught. So for me in particular, my path wasn't through college. I did a lot of self-study. I started with certifications like a lot of people on the call today, and just learning the skills and really getting a lot of hands-on practice by, taking some of those early jobs, whether it's tech support, system administration, and just kind of working up to those higher level roles where you can make a little bit more impact at those various companies. So in addition to being good at the technology, also being a better person, I think also makes you a better developer. So I think that part is important too. In the industry, we call that, bringing the whole person to the job. So I think a lot of people got to make sure that they're growing as a technologist and just also growing as a good human being as well.
Very interesting. A lot of participants now are not working at the desired tech company. What's your suggestion to them?
I think a lot of people always want to work at the big names like, at Google and some of these big companies. But the truth is you want to get experience no matter where you can get it. So that can work at a small place, maybe an insurance company. Lots of people start off in the government. There are so many places to apply your skill set. And the important thing when you start out is not necessarily to work for the biggest company. You want to go and try to find the biggest opportunity. You want to go to a place where you can actually learn some skills, make some mistakes, learn from the people around you. That's the most important thing you can do when you start it. So maybe it's not a software engineer as the first job. Maybe it's going to be in operations or tech support or QA where you're doing a testing role. either role that you get, you can always further your skill set. So maybe don't hyper optimize for just working at a big company. Maybe the goal is to work at any company and making sure that you get a chance to get some experience.
Okay, very interesting. There is a question from YouTube that asks Kelsey, what is your tip in becoming successful as a cloud engineer? What do you learn from your experience in Google that you can share to us?
So a big key to my success is the things I did before joining Google. I used to work in lots of enterprises, small companies, big companies. And at Google Cloud, we build tools for the enterprise to use, right? So it's a very unique situation where Google definitely has our own set of tools, but to be successful in the cloud, you have to be a little bit more than just a technologist or a great developer or a great SRE. You also have to know and have a little bit of experience. So if I ever come into the place where you work or may work in the future, it's good to have a little bit of experience, because today we talked about all these tools for doing data analytics, machine learning, DevOps, SRE, but all of those tools only work if people know how to use them. So the things that make me very successful as Google is having experience outside of Google, so that way I can relate better to our customers, and also being someone who also uses the particular product. So a lot of the tools and services we use, I use on a daily basis. So I'm also consider myself a customer. And even though I'm an engineer working on various products and services internally and establishing the feedback loop, talking to developers and future developers like you all, we got to make sure that we have empathy and hands-on practice with the tools. And that's the biggest secret. And there's all kind of details about how Google builds systems. But if you're early in your career, the number one thing to focus on is just getting experience running any kind of application, because all of those things are going to be the foundation required to be successful, especially working inside of the cloud.
So, ya sangat menarik bagaimana kita harus belajar dari pengalaman dan benar-benar hands-on terhadap teknologi yang dipakai. Itu adalah solusi yang sangat-sangat ini. Thank you, Kelsey. Next question, there's a question from YouTube. Kelsey, you're really good at explaining complex technology concepts to human language. Any tips on getting this skill and practicing this?
Yeah, this is a good question, because in order for me to explain it simply to someone else, I have to understand it at a very deep level. So when like Kubernetes came out, all these container things, for me, I had to really play with it for a while, get my hands dirty to get my own experience. And I also had to try to draw the new technology to things I already know. And once I can get those two things to line up, then it becomes a little easier for me to tell a story. So typically, when I'm explaining technology to other people, I like to attach the technology to some kind of problem. Maybe you're trying to deploy a website, maybe it's a database. So when I go to explain the technology, I always like to tell a story. And if I can't explain a technology by telling a story, it's a good sign that I don't know the technology well enough. So I keep practicing with the technology. Sometimes I'll contribute code at the very low levels, or sometimes I'll try to build something, even if it's just a prototype, to make sure that I really understand it. And once I understand it, I try to work on being able to tell a story around it. So I'm very patient. I just don't go read about a technology and then go try to explain it. And if you do that, it's always going to be complex and confusing. So I make sure that I use it first, spend the time, tell the stories, and then it comes out way easier, and it's easier for people to understand.
So, okay, thank you. Very interesting. Jadi harus digunakan, dipelajari, digunakan, benar-benar dilatih, baru bisa kita bercerita. Memang sangat menarik konsep yang disampaikan oleh Kelsey. Next question, Kelsey. Within the article I mentioned previously, 2014, you realized that the technology you were working on was fading away. How did you respond?
I guess looking back now, I've been in the industry almost 15 plus years. Any technology that's hot now will more than likely go away in the future. And that's okay, because that represents progress. And I think it's important for people to decouple their identity from the technology, right? So maybe today you're learning Kubernetes, or if you're doing machine learning, you're going to be learning TensorFlow. Or if you're doing SRE, maybe you're looking at tools like Prometheus. Those are all really great tools, But the thing is, you don't need to be a Kubernetes engineer or a Prometheus engineer. You just need to be an engineer and leverage the best tools that are available now. And in some cases, you're going to create the next set of tools that will be available in the future for other people to use. So just know that the technologies will come and go, but you got to make sure that the fundamentals remain. So for me, when I see things changing over time, I expect them to. And these days, I try to help make it happen.
Okay, awesome. So so actually understanding. Jadi benar-benar memahami bagaimana teknologi itu berjalan sehingga bisa menguni dan tidak attach terhadap satu teknologi khusus. Next question we have from YouTube is, what's the biggest challenge you face when you started your career? Any tips for beginners like us?
I think the biggest challenge is not knowing where to start. If you look at some of the jobs, they have all of the skills they want, maybe 10 different skills, and they want 5 years experience. And when you're just starting, you don't have all the skills and you don't have all the experience. So where do you go from there? And what I decided to do was just maybe pick 1 or 2 technologies I was really interested in. So when I started, I learned a lot about Linux. Linux was still coming up as, the new challenger. So a lot of people were very interested in open source and Linux. And there were so many programming languages to choose from. So when I started, there was Perl, Python, PHP, so many programming languages, but I decided to just pick one and learn it really well. So I think the biggest challenge is really going to be able to say, hey, even though there's so many things I could do, maybe narrow that down to a few things that you're truly interested in. And then the next challenge becomes really having the patience to know that you won't be an expert overnight, and having the patience and understanding that it's okay to be learning and it's okay to ask questions. That makes the whole journey much easier.
Sangat menarik. Jadi kita harus benar-benar ahli di dalam satu hal. Kita pilih salah satu teknologi dan kita dalami satu teknologi itu. Interesting, Kelsey. Very good. Next question, Kelsey. Indonesia is an underrepresented country in global tech communities or tech conferences. Do you have any suggestions on what we can do to improve this situation?
Yeah, so for me, I kind of come from an underrepresented group in tech in general. And when you think about being underrepresented, you ask yourself, what are the opportunities? When you look around the global technology landscape, you may say, hey, Indonesia is not represented. Do we belong? And that's a fair question to ask. So there's a couple of things I think that are important here. One is there's always local challenges. There's local businesses. The things that the culture needs. What the government needs. This is the first place I think the opportunities will show up to apply the technologies. And that's where there's a lot of room for innovation. The whole world doesn't have all of this figured out. So make sure you understand that there's always time to participate. You're never going to be too late. The next thing is, when you think about the global stage, there's always an opportunity to speak at a conference. And I think the mistake a lot of people make when they don't see representation, they try to speak at the biggest conferences that have tens of thousands of people. And at those conferences, there's going to be thousands to 10,000s of speaking submissions. What you want to do is start to think about the neighboring countries. Maybe there's things in Europe. Maybe there's things in other parts of the world where the smaller conferences might be the great place to start. Typically, you're going to have less competition for those speaking slots. And when you land them, it gives you a chance to kind of exercise so that way you can perfect those talks and provide them to the big stage. And the other area I think for opportunities would be open source. So all of these projects are available for you to contribute, whether it's Kubernetes or Prometheus if you're thinking about metrics or some security tools. Whatever is interesting to you, you can start to contribute. One area is translating some of the documentation into your native language. And that way people there can consume the technology in the language that makes sense to them maybe. So there's so many opportunities to contribute. So when you think about the world stage, don't think about it as being left out. Think about all the opportunities you have that are yet to be tapped into.
Menarik. Jadi kita harus benar-benar cari tahu opportunity itu, peluang itu, bahkan seperti menerjemahkan localization dari teknologi-teknologi yang ada. Very interesting. Next question, Kelsey, we have from YouTube chat is, how do we start learning at large scale technology with very limited resources?
Yeah, so when I started, and I think it's way easier now, but when I started, you definitely had to have access to some of the bigger things, right? There was no way I could ever play with a proprietary database. Let's take Oracle, for example. Things like that used to cost a license. It's hard to download. Don't even know where to get it. Don't even know where to start. But it turns out most of the most innovative software today is open source. And most of the big tools that you even see inside of the cloud are all based on open source technologies. And these days, most computers, like for example, the computer I use every day is about a $500 Chromebook that I got from work. And there's cheaper Chromebooks. You can even do this with a $100 Chromebook. And I do everything on Linux. So if I were starting to learn today, I would probably buy a laptop, maybe that costs $100, and have Linux there. And that way I can learn about databases. I can learn about all the cloud native technologies. Even Kubernetes will run as a small scale on your single laptop. And that's a good way to learn the fundamentals, how to make a container, how to run a container. Sometimes you can go and find existing applications and just go through the exercise of running them, troubleshooting them. Maybe you can write some code. But these days, even the cheapest computer can allow you to do, build, and contribute to open source projects.
Apologies, I was on mute. So jadi sangat menarik ya. Justru sekarang ini teknologi dengan adanya open source sangat memudahkan kita untuk bisa belajar. Zaman dahulu ada Oracle ya, kita harus beli license yang luar biasa mahal. Tapi sekarang dengan open source, dengan teknologi yang open source, dengan mudah kita bisa lakukan itu. Thank you. I'd like to mention a comment.
I'm going to add one more thing to that. When it comes to scale, like Google scale, where there's millions and millions of servers, I've hired a lot of people. And the thing is, you don't have to pretend to have experience with scale. I will hire new people based on the fundamentals. So if you have experience with just one machine, then I know that you're willing to learn what it takes to go from one machine to 1,000 machines or to 1,000,000 machines. So a lot of times, if you're new to your career, that's okay. You don't have to have the experience of someone that's been doing it for 15 years. Just have the fundamentals and have the experience that matches where you are, and then be very clear about your desire to learn. And I think people will accept that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to highlight a comment we have within, not necessarily a question, but I'd like to highlight a comment that someone mentioned that they feel it's easy to learn following the tutorials of JuaraGCP and Quick Labs rather than the form of documentation. So maybe next time they're interested to the tutorials in JuaraGCP will be free all the time. But that's something for us to listen to from the audiences. Next question we have from YouTube chat. Kelsey, building developer-facing products like Kubernetes and many GCP products is very different from customer-facing products. Any tips on building great dev tools that people love?
Yeah, so this one's tough. To think about building developer-facing products is that we tend to have a very clear stopping point. For example, when we build Kubernetes, the goal is to be able to deploy and run containers. If I was building a web server, it would be to bring in HTTP traffic and then hand it off to the developer. So when we think about building lower level technologies, whether it's an IDE for people to write code in, the contract is so much clearer and the experience is fairly limited because we know the persona. So developers, we can give contracts and APIs, and then the tooling need to allow them to adopt those things. But when you're building consumer-facing products, a lot more goes into the experience, how people feel, what does the web UI look like? You have a lot more around security and personalization. And then depending on the type of product that you're building, you're gonna have other constraints. Does it have to run on a phone? Does it have to run on a thermostat to cool the house? There's so many things that you have to do when it comes to consumer-facing apps that you don't really have to do when you're building lower-level developer tools, right? We can kind of stop, and we're also working with a very advanced user. A developer is going to be able to figure out a complex technology much faster than a consumer would be. So this is why I think when we're building consumer-facing apps, we spend a lot more on the presentation layer than the thing in the middle. Whereas when we're building developer tools, we can kind of think about the target user, and it's okay if the technology is a little bit more advanced or if the user experience isn't as polished.
Thank you, Kelsey. Jadi kita harus benar-benar paham siapa audiens kita, siapa target user kita, apa itu consumer atau developer. Kelsey, next question. Kelsey, how much do you think the importance of community when we are starting up?
Earlier in the talk, I talked about in order to be a good engineer, you have to be a good person. We learn from each other, we depend on each other, and we're building things for each other. So it's hard to separate the work from the person. So when you ask yourself about community, the community, when you think about open source and these technologies, it's the community that builds things and chooses to share them. It's the community that writes the documentation that explains how to use them. It's the community that takes those tools and technologies and does something great for their community. So the community is just a part of what we do. So in anything, when you're beginning, especially for me, when I started out in technology, of course you can read books, you can try to do a lot of certifications, but where you really grow is when you start to have a strong tech community around you. So what does that mean in detail? Going to the local meetups and giving a talk is one way to participate in the community. Showing people what you've built is one way to participate in the community, because guess what? Usually the community wants to see you do well over time. So even if you do something the wrong way, typically the community will give you feedback and say, hey, there's a better way to do that. So I think the community is one way to go faster, right? Because without the community, you're gonna have to try to figure out everything by yourself. And that doesn't work for human and normal society. And it's not the fastest way or the best way to do things in tech.
Very insightful. Jadi benar-benar penting peranan community. Kelsey, last question, perhaps, because we are conscious of the time. I'm doing a side project that lets me use Google Cloud, but sometimes I'm afraid that I will do wrong configuration and it will cost me my budget. Interesting. Any suggestions for me to learn on a real project?
I think when you start to think about, so when we think about cloud, typically cloud becomes super useful when it lets you do things that you couldn't do before. So like I said, a lot of Google Cloud technologies are also backed by open source. So a lot of the things you want to build, you should be able to build on your laptop. Now, when do I like to use the cloud? There are some areas where it may be even cheaper. For example, if you want to run an application that we only use sometimes, then you want to look at some of our serverless platforms, right? If you build an application that can run in a container, well, you can use something like Cloud Run that when you're not using it, it scales to 0 and there's no charge to you. Some things like Google Cloud Storage is also a great way to store some files that you only access every once in a while. So there are some services in the cloud that are really geared to running these kind of side projects without spending too much money. You can always put cost controls, you can always put monitoring in place, but you just make sure that you understand in the cloud, you have to turn things off, right? Just like when you enter a room and you're no longer using the light, you might want to turn it off and you can save money. I think the cloud is probably the easiest way of doing that. If you have to go buy a bunch of servers and put them in the house, you may not be able to afford to get started. So I think cloud will open up the doors for you. And if there's something you want to test that is super expensive to try, maybe you play with it for 1 hour, just turn it off, and that's the best way to make sure that you don't get a surprise bill.
Thank you. Jadi kita harus benar-benar tahu ya, kalau bahkan justru di cloud itu lebih cost efficient, apalagi kalau kita tahu kita spin up, kemudian kita matikan sewaktu tidak dibutuhkan, benar-benar cloud efficient, benar-benar cost efficient apabila jalan di cloud. Thank you, Kelsey, for your time. Maybe one last thing we'd like for you to share is, would you share any closing message to Indonesian developers?
Yeah, so I would say everyone starts somewhere. And the best thing you can do is not compare yourself to where you are now, to where people are now that they've been doing this for so long. It's okay to learn in public, ask questions, try things, don't be embarrassed, and don't compare yourself to everybody else. There's so much opportunity, there's so many things to build, there's so many things to fix, there's so many things to document that the opportunities will always be there. So focus on your personal growth, and congratulations to all you all that have graduated from the certification program, because this is how it starts. You're going to start by learning, and I'll tell you, doing this for 15 years, you're never going to stop learning. There's always going to be something new. So get used to this, but also celebrate it whenever you do.
Thank you for your time, Kelsey. We'll hand it back to Laura. Laura, anyway, thank you for your time again, Kelsey.
Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, Fawisu. Excellent. Thank you very much. I personally feel very, very inspired. And what an insightful chat. Thank you again for your time, sharing some motivational tips, especially for Indonesian developers. And I'm sure not only me, but a lot of us learned new things today from the fireside chat. Sesi berikutnya, kita akan mendengar dari juara GCP partisipan tentang apa yang sudah mereka lakukan dan bagaimana perjalanan belajar mereka berdampak dalam rencana mereka ke depan. Saya akan mengundang Fioni, a full stack developer, dan Farhan, GCP Certified Cloud Architect. Halo Fioni, halo Farhan.
Halo. Halo Mbak Lura.
Boleh kita mulai dengan memperkenalkan diri terlebih dahulu, dimulai dari Fioni.
Halo semuanya, perkenalkan saya Fioni Witaelia, saya full stack web developer di MII Metadata Elektronik.
Halo semuanya, saya perkenalkan, nama saya Farhan Falgani. Saat ini saya sedang bekerja di Gates Indonesia sebagai DevOps Engineer. Awalnya saya ada developer backend engineer, tapi kesini-sini saya beralih ke DevOps.
Kenapa Anda mengikuti Juara GCP dan apa yang memotivasi Anda untuk menjadi bagian dari program ini?
Pertama kali saya mempelajari cloud platform yaitu di pelatihan Digital Scholarship. Setelah itu saya ingin tahu lebih mendalam tentang bagaimana menggunakan cloud platform. Lalu saya mengikuti workshop Juara GCP Season 2. Setelah mempelajari beberapa hands-on tentang machine learning, saya jadi termotivasi untuk mencoba mengembangkan proyek akhir saya dari pelatihan Digital Scholarship menggunakan Google Cloud ini. Dari situ saya jadi termotivasi untuk menjadi bagian dari program ini.
Oke, kalau motivasi saya untuk mengikuti Juara GCP ini, jadi cerita saya dulu sebagai backend engineer, sering mengotak-atik server dan coba mengulik ya serverless seperti itu. Akhirnya saya beralih karir menjadi DevOps Engineer, dan dari situ perusahaan bingung nih mau menggunakan apa dari cloud provider yang ada, apakah AWS, apakah GCP, apakah Alibaba, dan lain sebagainya. Dan akhirnya perusahaan saya memilih GCP sebagai cloud provider kami dikarenakan user friendly, security-nya terjamin, dan tentu juga yang murah daripada cloud provider yang lainnya. Dari situ juga saya mencari course, dan kebetulan Juara GCP juga ada di situ juga. Dan saya mengikuti sampai akhir, sampai saya mendapatkan sertifikasi Associate Cloud Engineer. Tidak berhenti di situ saja, perusahaan ternyata bisa menjadi Google Cloud Partner nih. Dengan syaratnya itu, saya salah satu dari anggota perusahaan tuh ada PCA-nya, alias Professional Cloud Engineer-nya, Professional Cloud Architect-nya, sorry. Dan akhirnya saya mengikuti, saya review lagi materinya, dan alhamdulillah saya mendapatkan sertifikasi PCI-nya, seperti itu.
Oke. Bagi developers yang sedang memulai belajar Google Cloud, apakah ada tips bagaimana mereka dapat memulai perjalanan belajar mereka?
Kalau dari saya, untuk memulai belajar Google Cloud, saya belajar dari Quick Labs. Nah, di Quick Labs banyak sekali tema yang tersedia dan memberikan hands-on yang mudah untuk diikuti dan dipelajari. Jadi, saya mulai dari mengerjakan hands-on dengan tema yang saya kenal. Lalu setelah itu, saya tahu cara kerja serta tools dan fitur yang tersedia di Google Cloud, saya mencoba menyelesaikan hands-on yang agak sulit. Selanjutnya, saya mencoba untuk mengambil sertifikasi Google Cloud yang ada di Coursera. Selain itu, saya juga bergabung dengan grup Telegram JuaraGCP. Jadi di sana kita bisa sharing satu sama lain.
Oke, kalau untuk saya, bagaimana memulai perjalanan belajar Google Cloud ya? Caranya ya cari dulu passion Anda. Jadi karena kita mengikuti JuaraGCP ini, ya kita meraba-raba dulu di mana passion kita gitu seperti itu. Seperti kata Kelsey tadi, kita harus ada pengalaman dulu. Nanti di pengunjung kita tahu enaknya di mana nih gitu seperti itu. Jika kalian ingin menjadi developer ya belajarlah minimal ya tools-tools ya menjadi penunjang mendevelop suatu aplikasi seperti serverless kayak ada Cloud App Engine atau Cloud Run, Cloud Build dan lain-lain sebagainya. Jika ingin menjadi data analis, data science ya belajarlah menggunakan BigQuery atau enggak machine learning dan lain sebagainya. Jika ingin menjadi orang infrastruktur seperti sysadmin, DevOps atau SRE, maka belajarlah tools menunjang infrastruktur seperti Compute Engine, Kubernetes, PVC, Disk, Salt Tenancy, dan lain sebagainya, dan tools lain cloud native lainnya seperti itu.
Oke, terima kasih banyak Fioni dan Mas Farhan atas waktunya. Sukses selalu dalam karir dan juga kesempatan belajar selanjutnya. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Mbak Laura.
Terima kasih Mbak.
Oke, selanjutnya saya akan mengundang Tahir Hashmi selaku VP of Engineering from Tokopedia yang akan menjelaskan tentang the roadmap to innovation. Over to you, Tahir.
Hi, good morning attendees. How are you doing? And many congratulations to the graduates of JuaraGCP program. So today I'm going to just briefly talk about how innovation happens in the digital industry, and as graduates of JuaraGCP, where you fit into that whole mechanism, right? So as Laura mentioned, I'm VP of Engineering at Tokopedia, and at Tokopedia, our mission is to democratize commerce through technology. And what that basically means is that we lower the barriers of entry for commerce for the people of Indonesia through the technologies that we build to make it easy for them to conduct their commerce. And as technical fellow at Tokopedia, my job is to ensure that our technology strategy is in line with the business requirements, what we need to do over the next 2 or 3 or 5 years from the technology point of view, in order to keep ourselves true to our mission and executing with excellence, right? So just to give you some idea about what Tokopedia's business looks like, we have about 9.5 million merchants on our platform. 85% of them are first-time entrepreneurs. So we actually help people become entrepreneurs and start their own businesses for the first time in their lives, right? And these merchants, they have listed more than 350 million products on Tokopedia. And we get about 100 million visitors every month on our platform across our 45 different products and services, things like buying and selling goods, paying bills, topping up mobile pulsa, etc., etc. And running this scale of business obviously requires us to also be very competitive and making sure that we are continuously innovating to bring new features and new experiences to the market. So talking about competition, competition in the digital world is kind of very different from how competition used to be prior to the digital revolution. So one of the biggest challenges in the digital world is that the scale at which you need to operate is kind of unpredictable. So what I mean by that is that the business's ability to bring customers or bring traffic to their to their digital platform or digital business is basically just governed by how much exposure, either through viral word of mouth or through marketing and so on, they can get. And the responsibility of engineers or technologists that are running the platform is to make sure that whatever scale or whatever the amount of traffic that we receive, we are able to actually provide a good experience to the visitors, right? And talking about experience, the digital business is exceedingly experience driven rather than not just cost driven or based on the services that you avoid. And by experience, I mean how you make your customers feel as they interact with your application. So if your application is very responsive, it loads really fast, it provides what they're looking for at a price that they're willing to pay, then they have a good experience. Whereas if things keep crashing, or they're very slow, or they do not find what they're looking for, they are not able to get get their problem solved, then the experience kind of is not that great. So in the digital world, a lot of the differentiation actually comes from how the experience is built, and experience has become a differentiator mainly because in the digital world, innovation actually happens in a copy-paste manner. What I mean by that is that once you have come up with something new, it's very easy for other players in the market to actually build something similar, right? And it goes the other way around as well. So what that essentially means is that it's not just important for you as a business to keep building new features or innovate. You have to be very consistent with it. Your users should see you as a business that keeps bringing new features to the table. And also, it's not just about bringing new features, but also once a new feature has been launched, then how to keep improving the experience. And that's what basically constitutes innovation in the digital world, which is to go really fast as well as consistent with making improvements.
All right. Sorry about that. I think there's an internet connection from Tahir's side. Just wanted to check with him. Hi, Tahir. Are you back? Okay. Are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. Where did you lose me, by the way?
It was right in the slide. You can continue.
Oh, okay. All right. So yes, I was talking about how we do innovation in the digital business, right? And the way we do it is through the build, measure, and learn cycle. So in the traditional software industry, like the pre-internet era, the job of a software engineer essentially stopped when the software was burned onto a disk and then put in a box and shipped to the stores, right? But in the internet technology business, our job actually starts with shipping new code to production. And so some of the tools that really help in building innovative stuff are like TDD, test driven development, is one of the keystones for this, where it allows developers to ship changes or ship new features with confidence that they will not, they do not provide any interruptions to existing functionality, or they behave exactly as expected. And coupled with TDD is the concept of continuous integration and continuous delivery. So integration is about merging, changed code on a continuous basis with the production code, and making sure that the functionality is merged in a way that is expected. And then continuous delivery is about how it gets shipped to production and also becomes visible to users. So when you want to push a significant change, you do not, and you have a large audience, then you do not want that change to go out all of a sudden. What you want to do is basically push it out to a small percentage of audience to see how it is performing in production. If things are going as expected, then you roll it out to 100%. And all of this needs to happen in an automated fashion. And then there is aspects about security. So we know that the putting a business on the internet obviously makes it a lot more hard for you to defend yourself from attacks like DDoS or hacking and so on. So it's really important to also make sure that things that are built are also built in a secure fashion. And then there's auto scaling, which is required to handle all of the unpredictable traffic, right? And once things have been built, then there's obviously a lot of a lot of measurement that needs to happen to see how the things are performing in production. So our goal is to measure all aspects of the customer experience. So the tools that help in doing that are monitoring and logging and tracking, things like Stackdriver or Google Analytics and such things, to really give you a sense of exactly how the code is behaving in production as the users are interacting with it. And then once we have all of that information from these monitoring, logging, tracking tools, then we learn from them. We learn how, again, what we need to do in order to improve what is the experience that the customers are having, where are the gaps that they are seeing, and what we can do to make things better. And so we have analytics and dashboards and insights to provide that that knowledge of what to do next, so that we can repeat the build, measure, and learn cycle.
Sorry about that. I think there's an internet problem. If we can wait for around 5 minutes for Tahir to be back. Let me quickly check if he is back. Maybe we wait for another 1 minute. Hello?
Hi, can you see me now?
Yes, I can see you now.
Okay. Right. So as I was saying, what makes all of this innovation possible is the cloud, because the cloud provides all of the tools that are necessary for running through the build, measure, learn cycle. So for whether it comes to the tools that provide you the auto scaling capabilities, or the tools that provide continuous real-time feedback, things like Stack Driver or other monitoring tools, and then analyze all of that data to create the dashboards and insights that help in guiding the future, the next iteration of the build, measure, and learn cycle. And so where does that bring us? So given that the cloud is really important for the modern digital business, in terms of being able to provide an advantage to the businesses in running innovation, what we see now is that there is there's quite a bit of crisis related to the availability of cloud skills. So there are different sources provide different data, but essentially all of them say that there's a huge demand for people who have this cloud technology experience, and essentially the world cannot get enough of them, and that's true even for Indonesia, where depending on what numbers or what sources you look at, there are hundreds of thousands of unfilled cloud technology jobs. And essentially in that roadmap to innovation, then that brings you here, which is at the center of the cloud technology skills, right? Whether you are a data scientist or a data analyst or cloud networking engineer, security engineer, backend developer, front-end developer, SRE, no matter what cloud technology aspect you are skilled at, there is definitely demand for your skills, and the future is bright for you. And as you understand how innovation works in the digital industry, then you can also understand how you can acquire skills along that build, measure, and learn cycle to actually grow your skills as well as your career. And with that, I would like to say thanks and sorry for all of the troubles related to the internet, and wish you all the best in your career journey. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much, Tahir. I'll remove you from the screen now. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you again, Tahir, for taking out the time and for an insightful presentation on opportunities for cloud engineers. Tidak terasa kita sudah tiba di penghujung acara JuaraGCP Virtual Graduation Event. Ini adalah kesempatan bagi Anda untuk bertemu dengan para pemimpin yang berbeda-beda. Terima kasih banyak sekali lagi kepada Ibu Mega, Bapak Neil, Kelsey, Pak Wisu, Tahir, serta panelis kita hari ini, Fioni dan Farhan, untuk waktunya. Terima kasih juga untuk Anda semua yang sudah menghadiri live event kita hari ini. Ada begitu banyak kesempatan untuk Anda melanjutkan perjalanan belajar ke depannya. Saya harap acara ini dapat memberi motivasi baru bagi kita semua. Sukses selalu, terima kasih.